Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the 8th part of What If Deku Became a Vigilante. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 25, Round 3, Fight. Hitachi breathed in and out, trying to keep his cool as he stood in front of the one powerhouse, Todoroki. He tried to remember everything that Midoriya had told him about the dual-haired student. It was only that he was the son of Endeavor, so daddy issues, and that his quirk is creation of ice from the left side and fire from the other side. And that apparently if he uses both, the entire arena fucking explodes. He was not liking his odds. So, Endeavor, huh? Hitachi asked, trying to get the lead early on. For that, he was forced to dodge a barrage of ice. Alright, that's not the angle to go. Gonna assume you're not a fan. He was so thankful that he spent time training with Midoriya, because Midoriya's bullshit prepared him for dodging whatever fuckery this is. I'm sure there's a story there, wanna tell me? That got him more ice barrages. He spent a couple more moments dodging and weaving, because he wasn't good enough to hold entire conversations while running from the specter of death. No story? That's fine, we're not at that level of friendship yet. Let's get to know each other first. What's your favorite color? Hitachi was not proud of the totally manly and not at all squeaky sound he just made as he ducked to avoid being decapitated. He was starting to think that someone leaked his quirk's conditions. It's not something he has the brain power to think about right now, but he makes a little note to himself to think about later. No, that's fair, we're not ready for favorite colors yet. What about everyone loves jokes? Do you want to hear a joke? There was no response. I'm going to tell one anyway. Knock knock. Hitachi was about to think that it wasn't going to work, and then there was a small "who's there?" from Todoroki. He grabbed the mental link, literally sweating from both the physical and quirk strain. Walk out of the arena. Todoroki slowly meandered out of the arena, and he was sweating bullets as he watched the other boy make his way around jagged ice structures. He was getting really close to the border when Hitachi felt the link snap. He braced himself to be obliterated, but Todoroki was standing there, staring at one hand and shivering. Hitachi's quirk can only be broken out of by pain, which means that Todoroki was so cold that he managed to almost get hypothermia. Which was not healthy. And what kind of hero wouldn't at least check in with the guy? Hey, man, you okay? Hitachi asked, stepping forwards. We can take a rain check real quick, you can go see Recovery Girl for a BNHA. For Hitachi's kind generosity, he was encased in an entire fucking glacier of ice. He heard a whip crack, and Midnight Sensei declared Todoroki the winner. He wiggled a bit, and Todoroki just stared at the right side of his hand, as if contemplating using it to get Hitachi free. Do not do that, I don't want to have broken ribs, he deadpanned, catching Todoroki's attention. And why are you just staring at it? Is it going to bite you? Of course no dash. Hitachi pulled on his quirk again. Go to Recovery Girl. As Todoroki walked away with a dazed look on his face, Midnight Sensei came back and stood within eyesight. You know that's technically against UA's policy, right kid? I know, but I also didn't want to end up like Midoriya. She snorted. Fair enough. We did end up calling someone to get you out dash. Hi I bags kun. Hatsum floated down from the stands with a jetpack. I'll get you out real quick with one of my babies. Oh no. Oh no. Katsuki grinned, counting his money. He did the bet, he dabbed in front of a live audience, he was going to get his fucking curry money. His mom's curry was the best, followed by his own, but there's one shop in downtown Musudafo that's pretty tasty, and he is going to enjoy the fuck out of that victory curry. He turns the corner on the way to the locker room, and sees Endeavor standing there, waiting. Katsuki looked around, but he saw no one around them, and the hero was already walking forwards. You're Bakugo Katsuki, the other strongest student in 1A, the hero said. Yeah, that's my name, Katsuki responded. He was both flattered that the number 2 hero thought he was strong and wary, because he's heard many rants from Zuko about how Endeavor was the worst hero ever. It also didn't help that this was supposed to be for staff and students only, and that he was not supposed to be here. This entire situation was if Zuko was wearing a bunch of red flags and also pulling a fridge full of red flags. You will be the one fighting Shoto in the last match. I mean yeah, but I know that cause I'm me and fucking awesome, Katsuki said. How the hell do you know that? You will easily crush the frail girl, and then be fighting my Shoto. Frail girl? Katsuki asked, raising an eyebrow. Round Cheeks is friends with Deku, that girl is anything but frail. I'm sorry, are you presuming that she'll lose just because she's a girl, or because she has a relatively weak quirk? Because you need to check both your sexism and your quirkism. His mom is the head of the fashion industry, alongside his dad, and he has heard so much sexist and quirkist bullshit about her from snobby rich assholes. He didn't expect to hear the same bullshit from the number 2 hero, but he is willing to throw hands, rankings be damned. Endeavor ignored him and continued steamrolling ahead. Shoto needs to learn that he cannot only use ice, and must be willing to use fire. I expect you to fight hard, to prepare him to surpass All Might. Red Flag Deku was now pulling 2 fridges full of red flags. Your All Might fetish has gotten way out of control. Shoto can do whatever the fuck he wants and not whatever this surpassing All Might bullshit is about. Maybe if you pull your head out of your ass, you'll realize that he's his own goddamn person. Endeavor looked like he was fuming, but Katsuki kept going. Besides, old man, me and my hero partner are going to become the number 1 heroes, and once we're up on that pedestal, you can kiss my ass. You are not allowed to disrespect me like that. Endeavor shouted, his fire mask flaming up as he took a step closer. Katsuki scoffed at the obvious intimidation tactic. Yeah, and what are you gonna do about it, huh? This area is for staff and students, so you are trespassing. I will be reporting you to your teacher and principal. It's a student's word against the number 2 heroes dash. Actually, it's a student's word against a trespassers, Katsuki responded. So you can go ahead and try, but you will not win. Having thoroughly won the argument, he walked past Endeavor, continuing to make his way to the locker room. The hero called out from behind him, and how do you know you'll reach the number 1 spot? Katsuki turned around with a grin. Because I'm friends with Midoriya Izuku, and if I can survive being friends with that crazy bastard, I can do anything. His heart was still pumping when he made his way to the locker room. He sat down, just kind of processing everything for a moment. He could feel adrenaline running through his veins, as if he had just run a fucking marathon. He just mouthed off to Endeavor, the number 2 hero known for a hot temper and high amounts of civilian collateral, which displayed a remarkable lack of self-preservation, dignity, and respect on his part. Katsuki had a sudden, horrific realization. Deku is rubbing off on me. By the way, Bakugo, Round Cheeks said, beaten up but still grinning. Thank you for keeping your eyes on me. Katsuki looked up, and saw a massive fucking meteor storm of rocks above him. As he saw his life flash before his eyes, he remembered the earlier conversation he had with Endeavor. I'm friends with Midoriya Izuku, and if I can survive being friends with that crazy bastard, I can do anything. Turns out, he made a crucial mistake. Round Cheeks was also friends with Deku, and she turned out much crazier. Katsuki was giving out. An explosion required to destroy all the rocks would break his fucking wrist, and then his arm, and maybe even his shoulder. The only way to win was to dodge, and the only way to do that was to go out of bounds. But Round Cheeks was in bounds too. All rational thought left him after that. When she pressed her fingertips together, all Katsuki could hear was his heart pounding in his ears as he rushed forwards. He barely registered the look of shock on her face as he shoulder-checked her, using a couple small explosions to rocket them both out of bounds. He rolled onto his back as a thunderous boom sounded through the arena, a cloud of dust billowing from the impact. When it cleared, there was a fucking crater, and Round Cheeks was on her feet, one arm against the wall while she puked rainbows. Katsuki wasn't feeling much better. He was pretty sure he sprained both his wrists, and the festival certainly took a toll on him. He felt like he got run over by a truck. The stadium was dead silent. Midnight Sensei made her way over to them. Technically, you both went out of bounds at the same time, so you'll both go to Recovery Girl and we can figure out how to fix that, she gestured to the crater, for your guys' tiebreaker dash. Don't bother, Katsuki rasped, coughing a little from the dust. I yield. When both of them just stared at him, he gestured limply with his arm. She's the one still standing. At that, Midnight Sensei cracked the whip and declared Round Cheeks the winner. Said winner hobbled over unsteadily, one hand still on the wall. Are you okay? Katsuki just sighed, gesturing with his already swelling wrists. They're sprained. Round Cheeks leaned down, pulling him up by his elbows instead. She slung an arm over his shoulder, and they carefully shuffled off of the field while Cementos fixed the arena behind them. "Why did you dodge?" she asked, as they hobbled through the corridors. "Mito said that you can create a big enough explosion." Katsuki grunted. "Physically, I can create a big-ass explosion. But a big-ass explosion will break my wrist and arm for sure, and maybe even my shoulder. I'd rather take the loss than get killed by my mom for prioritizing one of Izuku's ideas before my own health and safety," her words. They hobbled a little more, before Katsuki could finally spit out the words at the back of his throat. "Round Cheeks, you're almost as crazy as Zuku. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "Yes." Chapter 26, Podiums. Okako was so thankful she had such good friends. She was sitting in the infirmary, being plied with Dramamine from Midoriya, while Bakugo sat in the bed next to her, 2 braces on his wrists with ice wrapped around them. He had rejected recovery girls' healing, saying that he didn't want to worry the old hag and that 3 days is plenty of time to heal sprained wrists. Shinsu was sitting next to him, using chopsticks to feed the angry chihuahua his treats. That's when Midoriya had to remind Bakugo that he's not allowed to explode his friends. So Kiri's Hime took over, and the rest of the Baku squad was hanging with him, while Shinsu tried to keep Hatsum from turning the infirmary beds into some other creation. "So you're sure the nausea is gone?" Midoriya asked. "I have more Dramamine if you need more dash." "Mito, you are one of my best friends, and I love you very much," Okako said. "But I think I only need 4 tablets." "Yeah, let's not overdose her right before she has to fight Todoroki," Shinsu deadpanned. "It would be bad if she died in the middle of her match." "She will not die from an overdose on children's Dramamine," Midoriya responded. "I mean, I ate 10 at once because it was the middle of the night and I thought they were grapes and I was fine. I watched you eat a Thin Mint off the classroom floor." "Nah, if she overdoses, she wouldn't collapse," Hatsum said. "We'll know she's fucked when she starts hallucinating." "Which is why I'm going to stop," Okako interjected, closing her friend's fingers around the bottle. "But I appreciate you very much, Mito." There was a knock at the door. "You can come in," Okako shouted, looking around to notice that the Baku squad, Sans Bakugo, Hatsum, and Shinsu were now involved in a game of Uno. The door opened to reveal Todoroki. He walked in, giving Midoriya and Okako a nod, then stood next to Bakugo's bed. "What is it, icy hot?" he grumbled, crossing his arms. "I heard about what you said to my father. Well, I hope you're not here to say you're going to kick my ass about it, because it's a little too late for that now. Also, he totally deserved it dash." "Thank you. So don't say wait, what?" The game of Uno was abandoned by now, and everyone was trying to listen in while making it seem like they're not listening in. No one stood up to him before. Not to his face. "You're the first one." "Of course I did, I'm the best," Bakugo said. "Also, it was sketchy as fuck. He was trespassing specifically to tell me not to go easy on you to teach you a lesson? Like what the hell? Also, he was quirkist and sexist as fuck. He called Round Cheeks a frail girl. That crazy bitch is not frail. And his all might fetish is ridiculous dash." The room immediately burst into laughter at that. "Kakan dash," Midoriya wheezed. "Kakan, please tell me that you said that to his face." His smug grin said it all. Okako was about to step onto the field, side by side with Todoroki. They had finally finished fixing the arena, so it was time for the final match. Todoroki was frowning, staring ahead at the field. And what sort of hero would she be if she didn't cheer him up? "Hey, I know you want to spite your dad, but I want to earn this win, prove to the audience that I'm not a frail little girl." She heard the audiences yelling. She had been tempted to float up and start punching some people until Aizawa-sensei stepped in. "So you better go all out." He looked down at his hand. "I don't want to seriously hurt you like Midoriya." "Then don't wait until the arena is completely cold to use your fire, and the arena won't explode," Okako said. Her parents ran a construction company, and thermodynamics were essential for construction work. She never thought it would apply to heroics, but the more you learn. "I can't control my fire." She shrugged. "No time like the present to figure it out." Todoroki stared at her for a bit. "Bakugo's right, You are a little crazy. What can I say? Mito rubs off on you. Izuku bounced up and down, Eri sitting next to him. He had gone back to the stands to see his sister again, who was currently munching on an apple. Thankfully, Auntie Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru didn't question where it came from. Izuku has pulled out enough pens and snacks from his hair that they've learned not to ask. The whip cracked, and I started filling the arena. Shoto was launching volleys with his left hand, and Izuku was pleased to see that he was holding out his right hand to keep a small flame generated there. Meanwhile, Yurika was dodging, and he could see that she was using her quirk on herself. Izuku leaned over, watching as she crept closer and closer. Her face was pale, but the Dramamine seemed to be working, because she didn't look like she was fighting back nausea. Meanwhile Shoto was slowly edging backwards, clearly sensing that she was trying to close distance but not quite realizing why. It was a slow inch race, and Yurika was winning. His eyes widened as she realized her plan. One day, Yurika asked him if she could train with him and Shinsu, Kaken trailing behind her. They accepted, since that day was when they were working on Shinsu's physical body mass rather than his technique. They only had a few weeks to get him in physical shape enough to not be knocked over by a gust of wind, so they were all going to use one of U.A's gyms. The one with actual gym equipment, since Kaken was the only one with an actual gym membership. They had started with bench presses, and had moved on to squats. Izuku was writing both Shinsu's progress and his own, with Kaken yelling tips at Shinsu from the side. Yurika was doing warm-up stretches, because she spent the time that Kaken and Izuku were doing their squats refilling her water bottle and making sure she had snacks. Alright, your turn Yurika, Shinsu wheezed, flopping face first onto the floor. Kaken rolled his eyes, dragging him out of the weight cage. Her bench press wasn't that impressive, a couple sets of 15 kilograms. He expected her to keep Shinsu's weight, maybe add a kg or two. No one expected her to start stacking on plates. Or to complete her 2 sets without dropping the bar. Izuku took a glance at the plate count, and had to do a double take. 70 kilograms. She was squatting 140% of her body weight. Round cheeks, what the fuck? Kaken asked, jaw still on the floor. She smiled, all innocent as if she couldn't roundhouse kick a man. I've always been stronger at my core than my upper body, so I decided to focus on that. Besides, a stronger core was more important for my quirk. They all stared at each other. Yurika, Izuku asked, do you know any martial arts? She shrugged. I took an intro to karate class as a kid at the YMCA, but other than that no. The boys all breathed a sigh of relief. They probably wouldn't be murked by a kick anytime soon. Given the fact that Shoto made no move to brace himself with ice, he probably thought she was gonna float him. He couldn't be more wrong. Izuku held his breath as Yurika got closer and closer. Shoto eventually realized that he had to stop backing up, so he dug his feet in a meter from the border. A dangerous decision. Finally, she stood in front of Shoto. He took a fighting stance, but it was sloppy and looked like it was directly taken from a shitty movie. It makes sense that Endeavor wouldn't teach him any martial arts. Izuku grinned as Yurika did, spinning around and aiming a kick straight in Shoto's gut. He was launched across the border, skidding on the ground. Izuku cheered when Kayama-sensei declared Yurika the winner. He leaned down and picked up Eri, spinning her around while they celebrated. He may not be on the podium, but he was going to celebrate his friends who are. Katsuki grinned, standing proudly on the third-place podium. Mindfuck stood next to him, still in shock. Icy Hot stood on the second-place podium, glaring at his dad in the stands, who looked pissed. Round Cheeks was standing in first place, the biggest smile on her face. All Might landed in front of them, holding 4 medals in his hands. With a grin, he started by placing the medal around Mindfuck's neck. Shinsu, keep developing your quirk and your physical prowess, and someday you'll make a fine hero. Mindfuck looked like he was about to cry. All Might moved to drape the medal around Katsuki's head. Bakugo, you have a fighting spirit, prioritizing both yourself and your classmates' safety. You'll be an excellent hero. Katsuki tried not to cry as All Might moved on. He had a reputation, damn it. He didn't pay attention to the rest of the ceremony, too focused on clutching the medal close to his chest. He did, however, climb up onto the first place podium and fist bump Round Cheeks. Was it another dare from Zuko? He would neither confirm nor deny, but he would say that round cheeks deserved a fist bump. Chapter 27, Aftermath. Hitachi shuffled in nervously, still holding the bronze medal to his chest. It was still surreal, a Gen Ed kid with a villainous quirk getting joint third place in the sports festival. Students had been escorted back to U.A.'s main campus to wait for their parents to pick them up. That's when Hitachi was called to the principal's office. He tried to be optimistic, but doubt still swirled in his head. Was he in trouble? Did they think he cheated? Did they not want him to use his quirk? Surely not, it's the sports festival after all. The principal's office did not look like how he expected it to. For one thing, it was enormous. There was a big, intimidating desk with a bunch of windows at the back of the room. But closer to the door were two couches facing each other, a coffee table between them with a stack of papers on top and an electric kettle. 3 cups of steaming tea were in each of the adults' hands, while there was one empty one where he would be presumably sitting. His homeroom teacher, Yamada-sensei, and his law and ethics teacher, and personal idol, Aizawa-sensei, had taken seats on opposing couches. Principal Nedzu was sitting next to Aizawa-sensei, and he looked comically small next to the taller man. An empty spot was next to Yamada-sensei, which was where he was presumably sitting. "Please, come in, Shinsu-kun," Nedzu smiled. When Hitachi nervously slinked over, he continued. "Would you like some tea? It's chamomile. A relaxing tea." He didn't know whether that was a good sign or a bad sign. "Sure, I mean yes, please." Nedzu seemed to take his blunder in stride, pouring a cup of tea for him. The warmth of the cup was grounding, seeping into his hands as he sat down. "Let me start," Yamada-sensei said, putting his tea down. Hitachi turned to nervously face his homeroom teacher. "You are one of my best students. I've been so happy to teach you, and I know how hard you've worked to get to the podium today, both in class and after school. I'll miss having you in class." Hitachi's eyes widened as his teacher started crying. He looked over to Aizawa-sensei and Nedzu, but Aizawa-sensei just rolled his eyes. "You're still going to be teaching him in English. It's just not the same. It's like losing one of your babies." Yamada-sensei wailed dramatically, flopping back onto the couch. Hitachi looked over at Nedzu, who slid the stack of papers towards him. The words "transfer to U.A.'s hero course" stared back at him. "Should you choose to accept," Nedzu said, "you will be moved to Class 1A. Aizawa-kun will be your homeroom teacher. You'll need to get these papers signed by your guardians," Aizawa-sensei said in his usual gruff way. "As soon as you bring them back, we can get you transferred over." He carefully grabbed the papers, as if they would crumble in his hands if he wasn't careful with them. "I will, I promise." His gruff law and ethics teacher, soon to be homeroom teacher, ducked his face into his scarf, but Hitachi swore he could see the faintest hints of a smile in his teacher's eyes. "Don't be late for class." "You may go, Shinsu-kun," Nedzu said, collecting his abandoned cup of tea. As Hitachi was leaving, Nedzu continued, "I'm excited to see what kind of hero you will become." Hitachi's foster parents were not the greatest. Granted, they could be worse. It's not like they physically hurt him, or anything like that. They didn't starve him, not intentionally. But being one of the oldest of 6 foster kids, he was often ignored, and most days he had to eat out of a snack stash, mostly supplied from Midoriya, from who knows where, because he's pretty sure the boy is poorer than he is, in his room, because his foster siblings had already eaten the rest of the food in the house, that was for the kids. Most of the time, this is a boon. He was left alone, mostly unbothered by his foster family about his quirk and what he was doing at UA, which meant his stuff was untouched, how he has the snack stash in the first place. They don't even notice when he leaves the house. He was pretty certain he could run away and they would never notice a damn thing. He's pretty sure they don't know he goes to UA. He feels bad for poor Yuki, as the oldest. She's basically become a live-in maid and babysitter for the rest of the kids. The one problem is that Hitachi's foster parents would never sign a permission slip. He had a workaround for this too, ever since he and Midoriya met. The beginning of school had a lot of papers that needed to be signed, mainly stuff like lab safety for science and permission slips for quirk PE. Both him and Midoriya figured out that they didn't exactly have reliable guardians to sign permission slips, so they decided they would forge the other's guardian signatures. Midoriya wrote Dataruti in scribbles that could just barely pass as Japanese, and Hitachi wrote Midoriya S in much neater script. As Hitachi walked back to 1C's classroom, he started flipping through the papers in his hands. A waiver for heroics lessons, permission for UAS nurses to treat him, a space for him to submit a costume design, and the paper allowing for him to be transferred. It was a lot, and a lot of the legal words flew over his head. But he was really doing it. He was really going to become a hero. He sat at his desk, seeing that Midoriya had already dragged his desk and pushed it next to Hitachi's. One of Ryudo-sensei's clones is standing at the front to supervise, but for the most part the class is doing whatever they want. Are those what I think they are? Midoriya asked, his eyes practically sparkling. Hitachi nodded. My transfer papers into the hero course. Midoriya grinned, and Hitachi jumped as the rest of the class started cheering too. He smiled sheepishly as the class started congratulating him, to the chagrin of Ryudo-sensei. You did it, dude. One kid shouted. You showed those 1A jerks. 1C is not to be messed with. Don't forget us when you become a big shot. When, not if. Hitachi may be a brash asshole at the best of times, but then he smiled, simply saying, thank you. After a few minutes, Ryudo-sensei had managed to get the class to calm down. Hitachi finally managed to sit down, and Midoriya was leaning over his papers, a pen in his hand, probably pulled out of his hair, and signing his documents. All done, he said, pushing them back to Hitachi, the pen laid down on top of the papers. Thanks, Hitachi said, not just for forging his foster parents' signature. For all of his help. Here, hand your papers over. Midoriya's smile never wavered, but the sparkle in his eyes went out. I don't have any, Shinsu. He faltered, capping the pen and putting it down. You've got to have papers. Midoriya looked away from Shinsu. Don't worry about it, we're celebrating your transfer. That's when it clicked. They refused your transfer. UAA policy apparently. There can only be one transfer into the hero courses from the Gen Ed courses every sports festival. That's bullshit, Hitachi said, resisting the urge to slam his hands on the desk like some kind of shitty lawyer. When we checked a couple weeks ago, there was never a limit. Midoriya shrugged. Policy changed. When? Half an hour ago. Hitachi threw his hands up. This is some pretty blatant discrimination. Midoriya smiled, but it was hollow. He hated seeing his friend so empty, like the light has been extinguished. I'll just try again next year. He opened his mouth to argue, but a newscaster's voice cut through the class. Hitachi looked over to see one of his classmates broadcasting the news on his phone, the rest of the class huddled around his desk. We've received reports that the hero Ingenium was attacked in Hosu by the hero killer, Stain. He's been in the hospital for several hours, and has survived the attack, although he has lost the use of his legs. Heroes across Hosu are left reeling as the speed hero continues to recover with the help of his family. The Ingenium agency has declined to comment. Hitachi looked over at the sound of a chair scraping the floor. Midoriya had stood up, his knuckles white as he clutched them into fists on his desk. The fake smile he had was gone, and he had turned pale. I'm going to go to the bathroom, he said quietly. Hitachi simply nodded. Midoriya, he said, as the other boy was leaving. When Midoriya turned around, he said, if you need to talk, or anything, I'll be here. Midoriya simply smiled. I know. As he watched his friend leave, Hitachi felt like a door was closing between them. He may have won his place in the hero course, but he felt like he just lost his closest friend. Izuku walked to Nezu's office, having memorized the route by now. Excitement hummed in his veins. He may not have gotten onto the podium, but he showed the world that he was there, and the fight between him and Shoto was truly something to watch. He would know, he's rewatched it already. He's long given up on knocking, as right when he stood in front of the massive doors, they swung open. The Stoat was sitting alone on the couch, tea already served. Izuku could smell the peppermint, his favorite. You are looking cheerful as always, Midoriya-kun, Nezu said, sipping his tea. Izuku smiled in response, taking his seat and a sip of his tea. I'm glad that you're looking better after your last match. Recovery girl healed me up nice and well, Izuku said. And that fight was the best I've had in ages. Shoto should use his fire more often, it's very pretty. I'm glad. Nezu set his tea down. I have unfortunate news. Izuku frowned. A number of different scenarios went through his mind, each worse than the last. What is it? As of 20 minutes ago, the school board decided that there shall be a maximum of 1 transfer per class per year into the hero course. It felt as if he was dunked into an ice bath. They changed the policy that fast. Nezu nodded. And unfortunately, since Shinsu-kun placed higher than you in the sports festival, he is the only Class 1C member who is eligible for transfer into the hero course. His shoulders slumped as he looked down at his tea. A white paw rested on his knee. I'm sorry, Midoriya-kun. Izuku didn't even realize he was tearing up until he saw a tear drop into his tea. He set the cup down onto the table, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. I will continue to teach you, of course, Nezu said, as if that was an obvious fact. Just as I would have had you entered the hero course. Izuku steeled himself. It wasn't the first time he's faced rejection, he can handle himself better than this, crying like a baby. Of course. Shinsu deserves this opportunity, he hasn't trained as long as I have. And Yagi-san will still be training me after school. I'll just have to try again next year. Izuku smiled, just as hollow as the determined act he was trying to project. Nezu must not be willing to pry though, as he retracted his paw. This was not your only chance into the hero course, Midoriya-kun. You'll have next year, too. Izuku stood up, bowing to Nezu. Thank you for telling me. I know you didn't have to. You're my student, Nezu said. As he turned to leave the room, Nezu spoke up again. You'll make a fine hero, Midoriya. This was just a setback, nothing else. Right. Izuku managed the best smile he could, before walking back to class with a heavy heart. Izuku sat in the back of the class, burying himself in his notebook. This one was different from his analysis one, using a different code entirely. This notebook is dedicated to villain analyses and information that he's gathered either as Kitsune or from his friends. Of course the hero course would find some way to block him. Exposing one man on the Heroics Regulations Board will do jack shit if the entire commission is corrupt. While the little fish at the bottom of the chain that have ties to the league and all for one have been churned out and replaced, the big fish at the top haven't been disturbed in the slightest. In fact, they've looked better, as if an investigation into the small guys will prevent something like the USJ from happening again. But Izuku was paranoid. They had to know that he was at UA. He was an idiot for taunting Shigaraki at the USJ, when he could easily blow his cover to the commission. Best case scenario is that they execute him on the spot. He didn't even want to imagine the worst case scenario. So he's doing what he does best, throw himself headfirst into his other problems. Izuku felt Shinsu coming towards the classroom, so he dragged his desk and plopped it next to Shinsu's. A Ryudo-sensei clone looked annoyed at him, but a few kids were already throwing paper airplanes and playing something that looked like blackjack in the corner, so it's not like he could do anything about one desk. Shinsu walked into the classroom, clutching a stack of papers to his chest. He looked starry-eyed, his head completely in the clouds. Are those what I think they are? Izuku asked as he sat down. If Izuku couldn't make it into the hero course, then he sure as hell was gonna live vicariously through his friends. Shinsu nodded. My transfer papers into the hero course. Izuku grinned, and he saw Shinsu jump as the rest of the class started cheering too. You did it, dude. You showed those 1A jerks. 1C is not to be messed with. Don't forget us when you become a big shot. Shinsu was clearly flustered, but he managed a simple, thank you. While Ryudo-sensei tried to wrangle the rest of the class into being somewhat decent, Izuku pulled the transfer papers over to his desk. He flipped through them quickly, signing papers in Shinsu's foster dad's name. When the class had finally settled down, he had finished, pushing the stack of papers back with the pen on top. All done. Thanks, Shinsu responded. Here, hand your papers over. Izuku just barely managed to keep a smile on his face. I don't have any, Shinsu. His friend faltered, capping the pen he'd just picked up. You've got to have papers. Izuku looked away from him, struggling to keep the cheerful facade up. Don't worry about it, we're celebrating your transfer. There were a few moments of silence, and then it must have finally clicked. They refused your transfer. He kept his eyes out the window. U.A policy apparently. There can only be one transfer into the hero courses from the Gen Ed courses every sports festival. That's bullshit. Shinsu said, and Izuku dared to look back at his friend. He was angry, pissed off, seemingly for him. When we checked a couple weeks ago, there was never a limit. Izuku just shrugged. Policy changed. When? Half an hour ago. Shinsu threw his hands up. This is some pretty blatant discrimination. Even Izuku could tell his smile was hollow. He had to remind himself that Shinsu didn't know. He only knew Izuku was related very distantly to a villain. Shinsu didn't know about the blood on his hands, or that the relative was all for one, or that Izuku could steal quirks. I'll just try again next year. If he wasn't dead by then. Shinsu opened his mouth to argue, but a newscaster's voice cut through the class. We've received reports that the hero Ingenium was attacked in Hosu by the hero killer, Stain. Izuku tensed up immediately. He looked down at his hands, and he swore that for a second, they were covered in blood. He remembered Itza, sitting in the locker room alone, worried for his brother. He remembered whispers of Stendhal's death and Stain's emergence. If I was out patrolling and wasn't at the sports festival playing pretend, Ingenium wouldn't be in the hospital right now. He felt like he was gonna puke. Izuku stood up. I'm going to go to the bathroom, he said quietly, more for Shinsu's benefit than anything else. The other boy nodded. Midoriya. If you need to talk or anything, I'll be here. Izuku smiled, just as hollow as the others. I know. He left the classroom, literally and metaphorically closing the door behind him. He's been selfish enough, he can't trap someone else in the clusterfuck that was his life. He told himself it was for the best. He wasn't sure he could bring himself to believe it. Izuku looked like a mess. The bags under his eyes were deeper than ever, and his hair was still greasy and damp from the quick shower he took after the festival. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was somehow both pale and sunburnt. He had dropped his backpack when he entered the bathroom, so it was lying under the sink while he stared at himself in the mirror. As he was staring, something black coiled around his neck. It lifted its neck to reveal that it was a snake, with piercing red eyes that ran a shiver down his spine. It hissed, revealing that the inside of its mouth was coated with blood. Steal more gifts. Need more gifts. Izuku stumbled backwards, flicking his wrist almost instinctively. The mirror shattered, but he could still see the snake in the mirror shards. He scrambled for his bag, pulling out a vape and closing his eyes, sucking in a breath. Immediately, the nicotine kicked in, and Izuku relaxed, letting the tension pool out of his shoulders. He opened his eyes, and the snake was gone. Just like the spirits inside One for All. He leaned his back against his bag, continuing to smoke and letting his body unwind. He didn't even realize tears were falling down his face until he turned his head to look at the mirror shards. Izuku sat in the bathroom, alone, staring at the shards of a broken mirror and doing a drug that was illegal on school grounds. How could I ever be a hero when I can't even be a person? Chapter 28, Introductions. To say Hitachi was nervous was an understatement. He was wiping the sweat off his palms. He could hear Aizawa-sensei's voice talking to his class, which didn't make him any less nervous. Especially since he couldn't hear what he was saying. For all he knew, Aizawa-sensei could be telling his class to bully him for the rest of the year. He's pretty sure his law and ethics teacher wouldn't do that, but anxiety is illogical. He heard Aizawa-sensei stop speaking, and took that as his cue. Reminding himself that they can't possibly be crazier than Midoriya, he stepped through the door. Introduce yourself, Aizawa-sensei said gruffly, looking like he hasn't slept in days. Which he probably hadn't. Hitachi cleared his throat, clenching his fists to hide the sweat in them. Hello, my name is Shinsu Hitachi. He'll be taking Mineta's seat, his teacher said, pointing it out from the podium. Starting today, he will be a member of 1A. Aizawa-sensei had the decency to let Hitachi scramble to his seat before dropping the next bombshell. I know none of you Hellions will be able to do any actual work, so it's a free period. Don't scare off or hurt him, and keep the noise at a tolerable level. I'm taking a nap. His teacher zipped up the atrocious sleeping bag, flopping behind the podium. Hitachi gulped, prepared to face the onslaught. Are you Aizawa-sensei's secret love child? Kitsune didn't even bother to pull on his usual costume. He dug out a large black hoodie from the back of his closet, a pair of leggings, and the high tops from his costume. He slid his mask on, pulling on the fingerless gloves, and braced on the windowsill. Midnight. Eri was sleeping, holding onto USA-chan. He was foregoing his usual patrol tonight. There was something more important he needed to do. Usually, flying as a crow was freeing. Usually it was just what he needed to unwind after a patrol. Right now all he felt was dread. It took a little bit of flying around, but he managed to find the quirk and followed the light, landing on the windowsill and peering in. Ingenium was laying in his hospital bed, alone, the heart monitor beeping slowly but steadily. Kitsune released Crow for Shadow Cloak, gravity pulling on him as he clung to the windowsill. Internally, he thanked All Might for all of that strength training at the beach, because he would be screwed otherwise. He opened the window and slipped in. The first thing he did was close the window behind him. The second thing he did was tiptoe over to the security camera, pull a roll of duct tape from his pocket and cover the lens. Once that was done, he released Shadow Cloak, tiptoeing back over to Ingenium. He took a deep breath in, braced himself, and pulled on rewind. Pain erupted from the left side of his forehead, and blood ran down the side of his face. The horn pierced through his hood, and he could feel blood sticking his hair to his face. He grit his teeth and kept going, taking out the 4 and all the various monitors. It would cause more problems to leave the 4 in and use rewind, and he was here to fix a problem. He didn't have a lot of time before the nurses showed up, so he pressed his fingers to Ingenium's temple and activated rewind. He held his breath as the quirk activated, keeping a careful eye on Ingenium as he worked. He held through the recovery stage, the surgery, the ambulance ride, and the injury. A few seconds after the injury healed, he let go of the quirk. The only injury Ingenium had now was a few scrapes. Kitsune reached up, relieved to feel that the horn was gone, and all that was left was torn skin. He saw multiple quirks running up to the room, so he turned around, running over to the window and slamming it open. When the nurses got to the room, all they saw was a trail of blood and a couple of crow feathers. Izuku pulled off the mask, wincing as he realized that there was blood on the edges. He pulled out the first aid kit from under the sink, wrapping himself up and wiping off his face and mask. He realized that there was blood on the edge of his hood, in addition to the hole, but just shrugged it off and tossed it onto the floor. He can patch it up and wash it off later. He heard the padding of little socked feet, and saw Eri peek into the bathroom around the corner, holding USHN in her arms. Like Izuku, she also had a bandage over her forehead. "Izunaya-kan." Izuku smiled, kneeling down and bundling Eri into a hug. "Hi, Eri bunny." They sat there for a few moments, just basking in each other's presence. "Do you want your quirk back?" he asked. "I'll give it back to you, we'll rewrap your head, and then we'll get you some tea and painkillers, and we can go to bed. How does that sound?" She nodded, looking up at him and clutching her hands in his tank top. "Did you help the hero, Izunaya?" He smiled, giving his sister a kiss on the forehead. "I did. You saved the hero today, Eri bunny." The smile she gave him was worth everything. It might be selfish of Izuku, but he would burn down the entire world to protect her. Musudafu Central Broadcasting at Official. Ingenium is miraculously healed by a mysterious shadow. Watch the news report here. God's mistake at Daria Kitsune. Guys, I'm not behind every mysterious thing in the city. PLS, stop adding me. Izuku slurped up his soup, ignoring the questioning gazes of his friends. He knew the bandage on his forehead was gonna look suspicious, but he hoped that I banged my head against the door frame in the middle of the night trying to get a snack would hold up. It helped that the bandages on Eri's forehead were covered by her hat. And people on the train kept congratulating me on being number 1. Eureka said, gesturing with her chopsticks. It was really cool. Aitsa nodded, seemingly absent-mindedly as he monotonously shoveled noodles into his face. Shinsu was nodding along, while Hatsum ignored everyone and was making something, it was unclear what. Izuku decided to switch gears. "Aitsa, how's your brother doing?" "He's gotten much better. I just wish I could have gotten to thank the person who healed him." He frowned behind his bowl of soup. Aitsa sounded off, like he was faking his usual cheer and bravado. He could tell that Eureka noticed too. "Aitsa, how are you doing?" Thud. She was interrupted by a lunch table being slammed onto their table. Shouto sat down, having dragged over a chair from another table. "Hey, icy hot," Kaken briefly acknowledged, before being pulled back into the debate between the Baku squad about whether a billion lions or every Pokemon would win in a fight. "Hi Shouto." "Hello Todoroki-kun." "Hi Conspiracy-kun." "Hey." Eri wiggled in his lap. Are you Shoto-kun? Shoto seemed to blink at being addressed by Eri, but gave her a small nod. She giggled, Izunaya-kan thinks your fire is pretty. His face went bright red, and he pressed it to the table to avoid the laughter of his friends. Shut up you guys. I'm sorry, mister, I'm going to ask if he's single right after waking up in recovery girl's office does not get to act shy now, Shinsu said, the traitor. You never answered my question, Shoto said, turning his attention, and the table's, attention on Shinsu instead of Izuku. He sighed, like this is a question he's had to dodge or answer a lot. No, I'm not Izawa-sensei's secret love child. That's about as likely as Midoriya being All Might's secret love child. Izuku looked up just in time to see Shoto pull out his phone. Actually no, you are not convincing my friends that I'm All Might's son. Katsuki watched as Raccoon Eyes got rejected again, going back to her seat and the drawing board. The rest of his classmates were struggling to come up with good names. Some of them were pretty good, like Round Cheeks and Frog Face, but others were terrible. Seriously, Sugar Man and Tail Man? How lazy could they get? He had written his name at the very beginning, laying the board so that it was face down, and now he was judging everyone else's names. Seriously, Earjack named herself after her quirk? That was so boring. Icy Hot went up next, showing off the name he picked. The Equilibrium Hero, Thermo, Perv Sensei read aloud. Oh, I like it. Approved. Everyone raised an eyebrow when Itza went up with just Tinya on his board. Are you sure? Perv Sensei asked. Names can be changed, but it's pretty difficult. He was planning on taking his brother's name, wasn't he? Katsuki kind of zoned out after that, coming back to when Mindfuck was standing on the podium. Hypno, the control hero. Very mysterious. Approved. He raised an eyebrow when Mindfuck passed his desk. That was a Pokemon reference, wasn't it? Like you'd do any better, Baku bitch. Oh, it was on. Katsuki stood up, glaring at him as he stomped up to the podium. He revealed the board, daring Mindfuck or anyone else to make fun of the name. But even the Wonder Duo needs names. How about Pyromite and Dash? Great Explosion Murder God Dynamite, Perv Sensei said. Well, I can't allow murder or God, but the rest of the name is fine. Katsuki's eye twitched as he stared her down, reaching over to the marker and slowly crossing out murder and God. Deciding not to argue any further, Perv Sensei clapped her hands. Approved. He ignored the extras praising, or panning, the name, sitting back in his seat and staring out the window instead. It would have been perfect if Zuko was here. Yeah, we'll be Dynamite and Pyromite. The #1 hero duo in the world. Alright, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.